Typically in Geometry Dash, a level needs decoration to become a prominent piece of the game's history. Raw gameplay layouts are just unfinished vessels waiting to be brought to life. The levels we're going to be talking about today are exceptions to that rule. They managed to make an impact and become incredibly popular, all without ever receiving any official form of decoration. One of them even potentially helped to push the game's skill ceiling forward. This is the story of how a layout almost became the #1 demon. Diamond Blade as a level almost never came to exist in the way it did. It was initially just meant to be a wave challenge, only turning into a full-length level once that challenge went past the 30-second limit the challenge list had set. It ultimately finished as a joke level, released to the servers with a declaration that it wasn't possible. When looking at the gameplay itself, its origin story is quite evident, with the infamous first wave being visually intimidating and difficult enough to back those feelings up. The wave is a grueling consistency challenge that just keeps going on and on and on. Beyond that, there was a lot of gimmicky spam gameplay and straight fly waiting for you even if you could make it past the wave. It was a series of challenges stitched together all in a row. The prospect of this level ever being beaten by a legitimate player seemed doubtful from the moment it arrived on the servers. Would there be anybody out there crazy enough to even try beating Diamond Blade? This is UFWM, also known as UFWM. He's one of, if not the most well-known challenge players ever, having made or beaten iconic challenges such as 3 Seconds Hell and its extensions, Torture Chamber, and Shield Death, just to name a few. In particular, he excelled at really difficult waves, which led to him trying to pass the wave on Diamond Blade, and so that is what he would grind for and eventually achieve. Passing the wave was a big deal when it happened. The level was meant to be impossible, and yet someone was trying it. Just passing the wave once took one of the best wave players of the time 4,000 attempts. And that is only just over a quarter of the level's runtime. If it was going to be beaten, you'd have to somehow get consistent with it and also not die in the nearly 2 minutes of gameplay that follows on from it. UFWM may have kicked things off with Diamond Blade, but he wouldn't end up the only one trying the level out. BGram would be the first one to really make progress on the other parts of the level and getting a run of 46 to 95. If the beginning didn't have enough ridiculous consistency wave gameplay for you, you also have to not choke the mini-wave at the end if you want to beat the level, which Graham died to in this run. In the description for the video, he'd end up saying the level was possible, and with that, he'd look to break UFWM's record from 0. Just 2 days after that run, he'd end up breaking through and making it to 41. The level was incredibly close to being done in 2 runs, and it seemed like that earlier comment about it being possible was ringing true. Although BGram had the world record, he'd end up fizzling out of the race to verify Diamond Blade, with this run being the last progress video he'd ever upload on it. UFWM was left to pick up the pieces and push forward on the level by himself. With his challenge skill set perfectly aligning with the level's gameplay style, he would quickly reassert himself as the favorite to verify it, with a new world record of 57. The second wave had now been reached from 0. It retains all of the click consistency ideas, but throws in a ton of speed changes to throw off your rhythm, which makes it really difficult to do. If he could pass this part, there was a real good chance of making it towards the ending, and so he'd continue to grind Diamond Blade in an effort to go further and further. 66 would come just a few short days later, and then the unthinkable would happen.
Fuck! Oh my god! No fucking way. Oh my god, I'm shaking.
The consistency mini-wave I highlighted earlier had claimed its first victim. UFWM was so close to being done with it, but that attempt it just wasn't meant to be. He still had a lot going for him, however, as he'd reached insane consistency, like passing the first wave 6 times in a row an hour before getting that fail. If he could just keep going, he could make the impossible possible. On July 23rd, 2020, UFWM got this run.
Yes! Oh! I got it! No way! I did it!
He did it. Diamond Blade was now verified legitimately. It was shocking on its own, but even more so when you take into account, when looking at full-length levels, UFWM's hardest before it was only Acropolis. It just goes to show how busted his skill set was for playing this level. The verification would go on to rack up over 700,000 views, and it seemed like the end of the story, but that's not where things ended off. Ryamu and N-Level would start to put together a new level that took the ideas from Diamond Blade and brought them to the next level. This would end up becoming Crystal Edge. With Ice Cave joining the project, it would become the official sequel to Diamond Blade, and this time it surely wasn't meant to be beaten by a human. All of the challenges from Diamond Blade were back and harder than ever before, with the long first wave, gimmicky cube gameplay, speed change wave in the middle, and chokeable ending all returning. It was intended to be a more serious version of Diamond Blade. The level was truly meant to be watched, not played, except not everyone got the memo on that. UFWM would once again put his skills to the test against the level that was never meant to be seriously played. Not too long after the level's release, he'd become the first in the world to pass the entire first wave with a run of 48. But then progress would halt. Months and months would go by with no more Crystal Edge progress. Maybe the level was impossible after all. If UFWM couldn't get any further, maybe nobody could do it. In the meantime, he'd work on other things like beating Cold Sweat and progressing on unearthed Silent Circles, but Crystal Edge never left the back of his mind. When July of 2021 and the year anniversary of the beginning of Diamond Blade's verification came about, he would return to Crystal Edge in a big way. 43 to 100. He'd managed to connect the level in 2 separate runs. This run contained everything beyond the first wave. If he could get consistent with the first wave, there was a possibility it could be done. And so following on from this, he'd return to playing from zero. 62 would bring him to the all too familiar speed change wave. By the time he'd achieved this run, he was on his 15th total time passing the first wave, and it didn't look like the consistency was going to stop either. Only a few days later, he got all the way to 81, and the level's impossible status was on the verge of being revoked. Just one more push to make history. On July 13th, 2021, UFWM was on a good run. Would he be able to seal the deal?
Yes! What?
Wait,
I
what?
did it!
Fucking hell, that's
I
like...
did it!
Wait, you...
I did a level! I did Crystal Edge! I did Crystal Edge! I fucked it!
In just over a year's time, we'd gone from Diamond Blade being seen as impossible, to it getting a much harder sequel and that level being beaten. To say things had come a long way would be an understatement. As for Crystal Edge itself, all UFWM could compare it to at the time was Cold Sweat, but in the present, it's commonly seen as at least on par with the at the time #1 demon Tartarus. UFWM very well could have verified a new #1 demon, all while it was in a state where it'd likely never be rated. It was all just for the love of the game, and that's what makes it stick out to me as such a special achievement. By the time the verification came, UFWM managed to pass the previously assumed impossible first wave a total of 123 times. Crystal Edge's verification just goes to show how far people can push their limits with passion and drive. And thus Crystal Edge's story was brought to a close. There was a fledgling attempt to create a rate hashtag for it, but it never really went anywhere and the level remains unrated to this day. As Crystal Edge had been beaten, it was time for another Blade series level to challenge the community. Minus World would be shown for the first time on February 2nd, 2022. It took on the name of one of Ice Cave's old impossible levels that, much like the original Slaughterhouse, had little to no variation in gameplay or visuals, and he'd grown tired of. Reborn as a continuation of the Diamond Blade series, it took a lot of creative liberties to differentiate itself from the prior 2 levels, while still having that unmistakable feel of having absolutely insane gameplay that was not meant to be beaten. As it stands now, this one has lived up to its impossible status, with the current world record being a 44% run by the current #1 challenge player Seals. It remains to be seen if anybody can take the level further than that, but if the previous ones have taught us anything, it's to not doubt what someone passionate enough for the level could potentially do. The rest of the story for this series remains to be written, and it could even be someone watching this video right now that closes the book on the Blade series for now.